Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, you can see it.
All right. Okay, so the topic for today is the basics of backend web development. Most times when people talk about backend development, they think of it as hard and difficult, but it's not the case. I know there's very little that is being seen, but when you get into it's not that difficult. Most times you will only have to deal with one language or max two languages. Unlike front end development that you have to deal with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and sometimes maybe a framework or um, an extra dependency or something like that. But for backend web development, is just one language or maximum two languages you'll be dealing with. So once you understand how it works and how information is moved across the application, then it will be much easier for you. This last statement I just said is very important. How information is moved, is passed across the application. This is one of the most important things in backend web development. You having an eagle eye view of everything and what is working. Because this way, when you are developing an application, if there is an error, it will be easier for you to spot because you can think through your application and say, okay, this data has gone from this point to this point. Okay, why is it not reaching this next point? So having a clear understanding of how data is being passed from one point to another is very important. So this is one of the things that we'll seek to clarify in this class, this brief class. So let's go ahead to begin. So backend development basically is the developing of the server side of a web application. Okay, so another thing I want us to take note of is that most times these words are used interchangeably. Back end, server side, um, we also have server. And then for the other side, we have front end, we have client. These two words, they are usually used interchangeably. I think there's one more. I can't recall now. But they are usually used interchangeably. Henceforth, when as we progress, we'll notice that these words are being used interchangeably, but they are all referring to the same thing or very similar thing. Okay, so backend development is the developing of the server side of a web application. Okay, so well, some of us may know, but in case we don't know, let me mention it that in a web application, you have the client side and then the server side. The client side, which is basically the front end, is that part of the application that you can see. Well, the server side, which is that part of the application that you cannot see, is called the back end. Okay, I don't know if this is clear.
Yes, no, it is clear.
Okay, okay, and there's another definition here. It also refers to everything that communicates between the database and the browser. For bigger web applications where you have a database, it is the back end that communicates with the database. The front end cannot communicate with the database directly. Okay. So the next point I have here is that backend development handles the behind the scenes functionality of a web application. So complex applications like portals, um, e-commerce websites, um, um, Which other type can I mention now? Maybe a reservation application, or an application for maybe a store or something like that. All these complex applications, they have a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes. Now, the front end does not do that. It's the back end that does that. This is why back end development is very important. I'm sure many of us are front end developers, or um, are front end developers. Yeah, I think it's also good to learn back end development and possibly combine it and become a full stack developer, because it gives you an edge in the marketplace. So if you are only doing front end, it would be nice to challenge yourself to take up back end web development too. So it's very important. It's interesting as well. So this point says that it handles the behind the scenes functionality of a web application. So there is a whole lot that goes on behind the scenes. Okay, so let's look at a simple analogy. In a restaurant, um, when someone comes, let's say a customer comes and sits down and makes an order, you find out that the waiter will have to receive that order and take it to those who are preparing it at the kitchen side. Okay, so you can call the table where the order is being made the front end, while you can call the kitchen where it's being prepared as the back end. Let me go ahead and explain. Now, the table is where the food is being served. Okay, the table is where the food is being served, and that's the final product that the customer sees. He sees everything well mixed and all looking tasty and nice, but he does not know what has happened behind the scenes, the stressful process, the shouting here and there, and all the um, processes that were involved in preparing that. Now, that happened in the kitchen, which is the back end. Okay. And then you have the waiter who takes the order from the table to the kitchen, and then the um, brings back the order to the table. Now, when an order is being placed at the table and the waiter takes it, that order, let's call it a request. Okay, so a request is being placed at the table, and then that waiter takes the request to the kitchen. Okay, please take note of these words I'm mentioning: request. And then when the food is ready, or the cuisine or whatever is ready at the kitchen side and is being given to the waiter, now the waiter will take that as a response back to the table. So the kitchen side is now acting as a back end in this case, and the table is acting as a front end, while the waiter is what we call an API. I'll go further and explain how. Let me not go ahead of myself. Okay, so this is a very good analogy of how web application works. This way, you know, when you're developing an application, you know where an issue is coming from. Okay, by the time you check, okay, data has passed from here to here. Okay, data has passed from here to here. Why is it not getting to this point? Okay, so just try to reason it this way. I'll keep giving more analogies, so that you can picture these things very well. Because the major challenge with back-end development is that a lot of it is not seen. It's not like design or front-end development that what you're developing is seen, is quickly seen. Sometimes you may spend maybe 10 hours or 8 hours coding before you can visually see what you have done. Working as a backend developer, right? You can spend a lot of hours before you see one functionality. So that type of thing, you have to find a way to visualize and know how information is being passed across the application. Okay, and that's the major reason why you have to make use of tools like Postman and also your console so that you can you know, time to time you have to make use of your console.log. You are working with JavaScript to, to print, to have some information come out so that you know where information has gotten to. You get, so this is a very common process that you use as a backend developer. Okay, so let's go on to the next thing. The client server architecture is similar to what I just mentioned, using the kitchen analogy, or rather the restaurant analogy. So we'll have the client server architecture. So the first point is that the client side is the application that runs on the end user computer. It provides a user interface that handles what the application feels and looks like and how it interacts with the end user. So just as we mentioned earlier in the analogy, the client side is basically what the user interacts with, what the user sees. Okay. While the server side receives requests from the user. In this case, it was written as client, but it's also the same thing, front end, user, client. Okay. While when we're referring to back end, we make use of some things like back end, client side, client. Sorry. When we're referring to back end, we make use of words like back end, server side, server. Okay, so let's get used to this word. Okay, so application that receive requests from the client. So the server receive requests, just as how we gave an analogy, the kitchen receiving requests from the table. So it receives the request and then it contains the logic to send the appropriate data back to the client. So it has the capability of performing all the functionality and sending back a response back to the front end. Okay, so just this show, you should always have this in your mind when you're working. Maybe you're working as a full stack developer or you're working with a front end developer. You basically want to know how data is moving across the web application. It is just an image to another image to illustrate. There are also cases where, okay, this is another scenario. In this case, we have only one client. In this case, we have only one client that is interacting with the server, but there could be multiple clients interacting with the server. Okay. Okay. Are you guys following?
Yeah, yes, sir. We're following.
Okay. Is it clear enough? Do I need to go over something again?
For me, it's clear. It's clear for me, sir.
Okay. All right. Okay. So as I said in the previous picture, we had only one client interacting with the server. But in this case, we have multiple clients interacting with the server. Now, let me explain how this works or how this can work. Most likely, when you're still developing an application and you're working as a backend developer, now while you're still developing it, while it's in the what we call the development phase, the server is on your system, the back end is on your system, it's still running locally. That's how we put it. It's still running locally. And you'll be how when you're testing it and running your request, you'll be sending it locally to your laptop, which is the server. But the moment you are ready to move it to production phase or produce the application, then you have to host it on a public server or somewhere where other users where other users can access it. Okay, so at this point it's still on your laptop, and you're sending requests from just one client, which is also your laptop. You're sending requests from your laptop to the back end. Now, everything is just on your laptop, is locally, but the moment you produce it and other people can now access it from all parts of the world, now it's more like this. It's more like this. Now, at that point, there are more clients that can access that server. Okay, I don't know if this is clear enough. Should I go over it again?
You might want to go over that again, sir.
Okay. Okay, so what I just said is that if I'm working on a web application, assuming I'm doing both the front end and the back end. Okay, when I'm done developing the back end and I have not yet pushed it for public use, everything is just on my laptop, the code is on my laptop. Now, in that case, the server is on my laptop, is running on my laptop. Okay, and let's assume I also have the front end on my laptop, meaning I can send a request from the front end to the back end, which is also on my laptop. Okay. Okay. In this case now, someone else cannot send a request to this server because it is only on my laptop. Okay. So at that point, we can say that there is only one client for that one server. But the moment, okay, let's say I'm satisfied with the backend code and everything, and I want to host the server on publicly so that other people from all parts of the world can use that application. So I send it for public hosting, and it's now like this. Now at that point, is hosted remotely. The server is hosted remotely, and then other people can make requests. Remember, it's the client that make the request while the server serves the response. Okay. So, so at this point, the server now is now available to anyone. It is not just on my laptop. It is available to all people around the world to send their request. Okay, so this is the second scenario where we have multiple clients sending requests to a server. Okay, that is why sometimes you may have heard something like this, that a server is down. This could happen if too many requests has been sent, or maybe for a very good example is maybe when they are trying to click accommodation in ABU. You notice that sometimes the server can just crash. You can imagine how many thousands of people are sending requests. They're trying to do the same thing at the same time. If the server was not is not hosted well or was not built well, then it can crash at that instant. Okay. On this image, we will have a laptop here. We have a laptop here. We have a desktop here. We have a client here. Now, all these four, I'm just taking my time to explain these fundamentals because so that you can have a good foundation in them and you won't have any issue when we progress. So now all these four, although they are different devices, but they have what we call browsers. They all have browsers. And also, a browser can also be referred to as a client. Okay, I believe this is the third name. You can also refer to a browser as the client. Okay, so now what we have seen a mobile phone here, but we were also calling it client. What we're referring to is the browser that is sending the request. Okay, okay. But when we're developing, I hope this is not getting too confusing, but when we're developing, we may refer to it as front end, back end, front end, back end. But sometimes as it gets further and maybe close to production phase, we may start referring to it as client. Okay, so on these images here, you see client, client, client. It's basically what we're just referring to is that um, something, a client side or a browser is sending a request and it needs a response from a server. Okay, okay. This explanation I just made, is it clear?
Yes, sir, it's clear.
Okay, all right. Okay, so these are just very important basics that we should have because we will be visualizing in our minds a lot. That's what you will have to do in backend a lot. And then sometimes you make use of the console or yes, the debug console to see where you're having an error or so that you can know what caused that error. Okay, so you have to visualize in your mind a lot because you won't be seeing it, unlike the front end that after writing some code, you can see what you just wrote, but a lot that you do, you may not really see it. Okay, okay. So I would like us to talk about something very important. Is called HTTP, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Okay, it's a communication protocol that enables clients and servers to communicate by sending request and response messages. Okay, so you can see that we are beginning to emphasize more and focus more on this request response because as a backend developer or you're working with a front end developer, this is what you want to be focusing on. What the request is and how the response will be. Okay, so you should you should imagine these things and know how you're going to be using this a lot. Okay, so by now you should know that the client side or the browser or the front end makes the request while the back end or the server side serves the response. Okay, okay, so now what is then this HTTP? Is actually more like a set of rules that you must abide by when sending a request or a response. Okay, so that's why it's called a communication protocol that enables client and server to communicate by sending request and response messages. So it is more like rules that the client side must follow and also the server side must follow when they want to send message. Okay, let's look at an example of a message sent from the client. Okay, so this is a request message. It's sent by the client. Okay, so as I wrote here, the beginning of the message is the most important. This place is the most important part of the message. We'll go into everything later, but I just want to introduce this HTTP to us. Okay, so we have um, this. You can just take note of the structure now. Later, we'll go in depth into everything. Okay, so the first line is called the request line. Well, the following lines are called the request headers. And then you have the last one, which is the message body here. Okay, let's go on. We'll go over this again. So, and then for the response message, uh, this is all the same thing. You have the status line, or in this case, in the case where it's a request message being sent, that's from the client, it's called a request line. Okay, and then in this case, you can call it a response line or a status line. That is more like the status of the request that was sent. Okay, so everything, most of what you'll be doing is more about request and then response. A client sending a request, and while the server is sending a response. So here we had request line at the top. So the client is sending a request, and at the top you have a request line. So when the server responds, with a response line or a status line. That is to show that, okay, for this request, this is the status. Okay, this is the response. I don't know if you're getting it. Just as we had request headers here, we also have response headers here. Okay, just as we have request body here, we also have response body here. So basically, this is how working as a backend developer will be. Okay, although there are more interesting aspects to this. Hopefully, when we're done with all the technical sessions, we may have maybe a combined session with the front end guys so that we can just put together some of these very important things and create a very wonderful web application. Okay, so let me go on to the types of websites. We have the static website and then the dynamic website. Okay, a static website is a simple website. Okay, is one that you just make a response and then you just make a request from your browser. Remember, we mentioned that the browser is also the client, is also the front end. Okay, so you just make a request from your browser, the client, and then the request goes to the server, and the result comes out as a response. So this type of simple website is called a static website. Okay, an example of a static website is okay, let me say a simple web page that displays a simple website that displays pictures. Let me put it that way. Okay, so let's assume we have all the members of the core team, their pictures on our server. Okay, we have all the pictures of the members of the core team on our server, so that whenever someone on the browser or on the client side makes a request for someone's picture, anybody's picture, okay, the request comes to the server, and then the server will pick the person's picture and give it as a response immediately. Okay, so this is an example of a very simple website. Another website is I would like to mention is this popular website. Okay, I've previously built that was some time for a it's a laundry company, more like a laundry company, where all their details will be there, their services, their location, some of the things that they do. Okay, so now that website is very simple because okay, okay, we have the home page, we have the about page, we also have the contact us page. So the moment you make a request, let's say you're looking for details about their contact and you click on that contact us page, it goes directly to the server and immediately brings out that information. It's not performing any task in the background. It is not trying to calculate anything. It just goes and fetches that data and brings it back to you immediately as a response. Okay, so these are examples of static websites. I don't know if this is clear to all of us. Can you just indicate?
Yes, it is clear.
Okay. Okay, so I'll go on to the next type of website, which is the dynamic website. Okay, as we can see here, starting from the far right, we have the client or the, sorry, this is a mistake. This should be browser, not web server. I will correct that in the slide before sending it. Okay, this should be client slash web browser, not web server. Okay, so the request is being made from the client to the web server. And for the web server to be able to process this well, it has to request for some data from the database. Okay. And then the database returns that data to the web server. The web server will now reprocess everything before it finally sends it to the client. Okay, so if you go on Jumia, if you go on Jumia and okay, you want to buy a power bank on Jumia. Okay, let's assume you want to buy a power bank. There is an option to buy a power bank with just a USB cord or more accessories. Okay, so let's assume you are just buying a power bank with a USB cord and it's written there 15,000 naira. Now, if you also want to click on the power bank which has more accessories, let's say that one is 25,000 naira. Now, before the web server can show you the power bank of 25,000 naira, it has to go to the database and check. Okay, it has to go to the database and check for a power bank with such more accessories before it can bring it back to you. Okay, that's why maybe it was showing an image of just a normal power bank with just a USB cable of 15,000 naira, and then after you now click on the power bank with more accessories, it changes to 25,000 and image also changes. Before that happens, it has gone to the database and then taking your request to the database And also, you know, for the price to change, for the picture to change, all these things are together. Before they change, it has to go and get that information from the database and bring it back. That's why it's being called a dynamic website, because although you have you have images, although you have um, a shape designed where a picture is supposed to fit, that thing can change. It is dynamic. Okay, it can go to the database and update information and come and change what is there. So it is dynamic. All right. So this is the difference between a dynamic website and a static website. A static website just collects the data like that and serves it back to the client, or gives it back as a response to the client. But a dynamic website goes in, um, check, collect all information that needs to be changed. If it's the price, okay, it's changing to 25,000, the picture is changing, okay, maybe the color is changing, all those things are changing, and it comes back to the web server, and then the web server will now process it and send it to you as a response. So this is the difference between a dynamic and static website. I'm sure from the explanation alone, you can tell that a dynamic website will be more complex to build than a static website. So basically, this is how it works on the back end. Okay. So is this clear? Are
Yes,
we
sir.
together? Okay. Okay, so I wanted us to go into something, but I think I'll leave it for our next session when there will be more people. Okay. So this will be all for today's session. This will be all for today's session. Hopefully, our next session will do so much more. And then in our next session, I'm hopeful that we will do some live coding. And if I can, I'll prepare something on the front end so that we can, just be seeing what we're doing on the back end. Okay, so thanks for attending this session. I'm sure you gain value and something to start off your career with. I'm very open and willing to share any extra information that you need. Please, if you have any more questions, please just feel free to ask me on the group chat or any other place. All right. Thanks so much for coming. I appreciate you all. Right. I think having said this, our session today has come to a close. Hopefully, our next session will be something very technical and very encompassing. Right. Do have a great night.